International news with Nisha Pillay.
Asia reacts to mad cow disease. South Korea bans all Japanese beef. Japan admits Asia's first possible case of BSE on a farm near Tokyo. A Chinese court awards over $1 million to the family of an AIDS victim. And a judge orders Australia to accept over 400 asylum seekers. Welcome to BBC World News. I'm Nisha Pillay. Singapore and South Korea have temporarily banned the import of beef from Japan because of a suspected case of mad cow disease, or BSE, on a farm east of Tokyo. If confirmed, the case would be the first known outbreak of BSE in Asia.
It was news which Japanese hoped they would never see, the first suspected case of mad cow disease in their country. The report was announced by the Minister of Agriculture, anxious to reassure the public that the virulent disease would not be allowed to take hold and spread, as it did in Britain a decade ago.
The cow has already been disposed of and has not been used for food. The Agricultural Ministry has formed a committee to deal with this, and we are also investigating where the cow came from and what it had eaten, and also implementing steps to isolate the other cows at the farm.
What's puzzling scientists investigating the case is that Japan banned the use of bone meal, the suspect cattle feed thought to cause mad cow disease, in 1996, before the birth of the cow, which has now tested positive. Japan also has stringent veterinary controls and exports very little beef. Despite this, though, South Korea and Singapore have already announced bans on Japanese beef. Japanese consumers have reacted with caution and in some cases confusion. If this does prove to be Japan's and Asia's first confirmed case of the disease, it could have severe knock-on effects for producers and consumers in a keen meat-eating society. Jim Fish, BBC News.
A US airman accused of raping a woman in a parking lot on the Japanese island of Okinawa has pleaded not guilty at the opening of his trial. Sergeant Timothy Woodward admitted he'd had sex with the woman, but told the Japanese court she'd consented. The case is reported to have revived resentment towards the US military presence on Okinawa. The small southern island was the scene of mass protests in 1995 after 3 US soldiers there raped a 12-year-old girl. 5 people have been killed in landslides and floods after a typhoon swept over Tokyo and into northern Japan. There was transport chaos as roads were closed and trains and flights were cancelled. It was the second typhoon to hit central Japan in less than a month.
Typhoon Danas came ashore south of Tokyo. It battered the coastline with winds of more than 120 kilometres an hour. It then moved inland, bringing transport chaos to the heavily populated area around the capital. Hundreds of flights were cancelled and tens of thousands of passengers were left stranded. Japan's railway network was also badly affected, with 400 trains idled by the passing storm. In Tokyo, schools were closed, but many people struggled into work as normal.
The biggest threat from this typhoon is the torrential rain it's bringing with it. The storm is moving extremely slowly, and that means even more prolonged downpours. The city is on its maximum state of alert.
Swollen rivers threatened to burst their banks and thousands were evacuated from low-lying districts. But as usual, mountain areas were most badly affected. Mudslides and landslips washed away roads and houses. It was in the mountains that most of the casualties occurred. This rescue team worked through the teeth of the storm to evacuate those stranded by the rising waters. Heavy rains are continuing in northern Japan as the weakening storm continues on its path. Charles Scanlon, BBC News, Tokyo.
A Chinese hospital has been ordered to pay more than $1 million compensation to the family of an AIDS victim. She died after contracting the HIV virus from contaminated blood. The court ruling could result in a flood of claims over thousands of similar cases. In China, the use of unsterilized equipment for collecting blood has been common until recently. In Australia, a court has ruled against the government's decision to bar entry to over 400 asylum seekers. The federal court in Melbourne said the refugees should be released in Australia and gave the government until Friday to comply. The government says it'll appeal and has ordered the naval ship carrying the mainly Afghan refugees to extend its journey and sail to the Pacific island state of Nauru. Australian government lawyers argued the refugees forfeited their right to asylum by forcing the ship to sail to Australia rather than Indonesia, which was closer. In any case, they said, Australia has the right to exclude anyone. But the court rejected this. It said it was an ancient power of the court to protect people against unlawful detention. The refugees' lawyer said he was happy the court had ruled in favour of the law and not reacted to the politics surrounding the case.
Justice Tony North's ruling is a huge setback for a government keen to show its people it's no soft touch when it comes to would-be asylum seekers.
The applicants have established that the rescuees were held in detention by the respondents without lawful authority. An ancient power of the court is to protect people against detention without lawful authority.
In late August, the authorities here refused entry to hundreds of refugees who'd been rescued from a sinking Indonesian ferry by a Norwegian cargo ship. The Australian SAS was sent in to take control of the vessel as it headed towards Australian territory. The migrants on board, mostly Afghans, remained on deck for a week. This, Justice North said, was an infringement of their civil liberties. They were unlawfully detained. They should have been allowed into Australia. Instead, the government moved the refugees to a Navy ship and negotiated a deal to send them to New Zealand and the tiny Pacific Republic of Nauru, where their asylum applications would be processed. All that could still happen. The government has said it will appeal today's court ruling.
We disagree very strongly. We believe that the decisions that we've taken all through this, on advice from senior Commonwealth officers, have been lawful.
So the dream the refugees had of making a new life here in Australia is one step closer, but there's still a long way to go. Whatever the outcome of the government's appeal of today's ruling, this case is likely to go all the way to the High Court, a process that could take some time. Clive Myrie, BBC News, Sydney.
A decision is expected shortly on whether Eurotunnel, that's the company which operates the tunnel between England and France, has been successful in its bid to have the Sangatte refugee centre near Calais shut down. In a court in Lille this morning, Eurotunnel accused the French authorities of inaction and of encouraging traffickers to trade in human beings. The company claims that the centre has become a magnet for asylum seekers trying to enter Britain illegally.
Last night, like every night, the illegal immigrants were on the move, making the short walk from Sangatte to the tunnel entrance, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to make a jump for it. But this morning, unlike any other, Eurotunnel were taking the French government to court, demanding the immediate closure of the refugee centre. Their argument that French government inaction was almost encouraging the refugees.
The apparent passivity of the French government to act against the human traffickers who operate openly in the camp, creating the conditions that facilitate the passage of clandestines towards England, is worsening the condition.
And what do you do if you lose this case today?
If we lose the case today, we will appeal to the High Court in France.
But the French government lawyer said, somewhat extraordinarily, why all the media fuss about a simple disused factory? And they said Sangatte was requisitioned perfectly legally to meet a humanitarian need. So what if the government was to lose?
They will stay here.
If it's closed, if you lose, what will happen?
They will be in the street.
They will be
in the street where they were before the creation of the centre of Sangatte. They were in a park of Calais.
And that is the conundrum for all those involved. By solving one problem, do you simply create another?
The result of the court case will be known later this afternoon, and then tomorrow it'll be the turn of the Home Secretary David Blunkett to apply pressure to the French. All sides agree that something has to be done, but what and when is proving more elusive. John Sopel, BBC News, Lille.
Iraq says it's shot down a US reconnaissance plane, the second such incident in 2 weeks. The state-run news agency says the aircraft was downed near the southern city of Basra. Western defense sources have suggested that the US did lose contact with one of its unmanned reconnaissance planes, but there's been no response from the US. Last month, a similar aircraft went missing in the same area. Israeli tanks have sealed off the town of Jenin in the northern West Bank. The Israeli army says the operation is meant to prevent Palestinian suicide bombers infiltrating Israel. The large force of tanks blocked all routes around the town and shelled the electricity plant. Israeli troops are searching for gunmen who killed 2 Israeli border guards early today near the Magal kibbutz in northern Israel.
Israeli troops again move into Palestinian-controlled territory. Under the cover of night, they surrounded Jenin in the northern West Bank, blocking all roads in and out of here. Exchanges of fire were reported and 4 Palestinians injured as mosques broadcast appeals on residents to go out and defend the town. But the Israelis have so far stayed outside. They say their operation is designed to prevent further suicide bombings after accusing this man of hiding in Jenin. Mohammed Hobeishi, an Israeli Arab, is seen here saying he carried out an attack on the town of Nahariya on Sunday in the name of the Islamic militant group Hamas. There was new bloodshed too along Israel's border with the West Bank. 2 Israeli border guards were shot dead at a military base near the town of Tulkarem when Palestinian gunmen opened fire on them.
The Israeli government is today discussing its whole approach to almost a year of conflict. Talks between Yasser Arafat and the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres are still a prospect, but the longer they're put off, the more chance there is that further violence could derail them. Caroline Hawley, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Coming up on this programme, who will lead Britain's main opposition party? We give you a preview after the break. Stay with us. Hello again. These are the headlines. South Korea bans all Japanese beef after Japan admits Asia's first case of BSE. And a Chinese court awards over $1 million compensation to the family of an AIDS victim. Time for the business news now. Here's Jane Sinclair.
Thanks, Nisha. Nokia, the world's largest mobile phone maker, has issued a profit warning. Along with rival technology companies, it's warned that third quarter sales will be down. In Nokia's case, it predicts a decline of 5% from a year earlier because of the global slowdown. But it said it expects to meet its earning per share guidance for the quarter. The news comes as no surprise, though. Nokia has seen its share price drop in recent weeks as the market anticipated that it would miss its sales and profit goals for the third quarter. Times may be hard, but luxury cars are still on the shopping list. Porsche, the German maker of luxury sports cars, saw its full-year profit accelerate by 18% as sales hit new records. Porsche sold over 54,000 of its 911 and Boxster models, 12% more than a year earlier, and the company says its current year outlook is positive. Meanwhile, fellow German producer BMW says unit sales are up by 9.5% in the first 8 months of the year to almost 600,000 vehicles. Sales in the Americas jumped by over 20%. The company said it expected global sales of over 900,000 vehicles for the full year. Not to be outdone, sales for Mercedes-Benz, part of Daimler Chrysler, have jumped 21% since the start of the year. They sold 750,000 vehicles between January and August. The yen has slipped against the dollar since international credit rating agency Standard & Poor's put a question mark over Japan's ability to deal with its economic crisis earlier. S&P downgraded its outlook on Japan's long-term credit ratings to negative from stable. S&P believes more needs to be done by the government and the Bank of Japan to revive the world's second-largest economy. The news comes less than a week after rival ratings agency Moody's put Japan's bonds under review for a possible downgrade. The benchmark Nikkei index has lost a quarter of its value since Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi took office in April. Right, now let's have a look at how the markets are doing. You can see here that the Nikkei was trading down about 1%, up 1%. The Hang Seng was up and so was Singapore. As far as the European markets are concerned, they started the day positively and that's where they've stayed. Well, that's all from me for now. It's back to Nisha.
Thanks so much, Jane. Christie's The Auction House has been showing off an extraordinary collection of 20th century art in New York. Picasso, Miro, Magritte, that sort of thing, like of which hasn't been seen in public for more than 70 years. The proceeds are being donated to charity, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, in fact, and it could get over $40 million. Jane Stanley reports.
The likes of it haven't been seen before. One of the best private collections of modern art to be auctioned for charity. There are works by Miro, Picasso and Leger. Their owner, Madame Jeanne Gaffet, died last year, donating them all to the UN's Children's Fund, UNICEF. A portrait of her late husband, René, is part of the collection. A visionary patron and friend of modernist painters in the 20s and 30s, the works he acquired have art historians very excited.
It's extraordinary. This collection was formed primarily 70 to 80 years ago. Many of the works are museum quality, and in fact many of the works that were formerly in Monsieur Gaffet's collection are now hanging on walls of many of the world's most important museums, both here and in Europe. It's an extraordinary moment for the art market.
There will be no reserve prices, though some of the paintings are valued at more than $5 million each. The aim, to raise as much as possible for charity. And, says UNICEF's Special Ambassador, film star Susan Sarandon, similar donations in the future.
Well, we could use it. We can use it wisely. So, if anyone's tired of looking at your Picasso and you're trying to figure out what to do with it, this has set a precedent, so please feel free.
This collection is expected to raise at least $40 million at auction. The fact that the works haven't been seen in public before, a major selling point. The collection's now about to leave New York for a European tour, but when it returns in November for sale, everyone's predicting a tense and thrilling auction with high prices, all for charity. Jane Stanley, BBC News, New York.
The world's coral reefs are disappearing at an alarming rate, according to a new study. Scientists working for the United Nations have drawn up the first World Atlas of Reefs. They say the coral is being poisoned by polluted water, smothered by soil washed off the land, and killed by global warming.
Coral reefs have more different plants and animals per square yard than tropical forests. They're the most diverse ecosystems on the planet. Here at the London Aquarium, they grow their own for the display tanks, taking cuttings to start new corals. But in the wild, they're disappearing fast.
It's only in the last few years that cheap travel and better diving technology have opened up the reefs for many of us. Ironically, the same space of time has seen them disappear, almost in front of our very eyes.
If the reefs vanished, so would the money from tourism which they attract. But for the smaller tropical islands like the Maldives and Seychelles, reefs provide valuable fishing grounds and protection against storms. Lives depend on them. But coral is fragile. Tourism can pollute the water, fishing destroy the ecosystem. The most alarming threat, though, is global warming, which triggers coral bleaching. Some species can be killed by a 1 centigrade rise in water temperature.
We have to try and stop or reverse global warming and climate change. We have to do that. But also we have to think a little bit more broadly. Reefs are threatened, as I've said, by a whole spectrum of different threats. And if we can minimize some of the other threats, perhaps the reefs will be a little bit better able to cope with this new threat.
Over half our reefs are already threatened by human activity. This report warns that climate change could see tropical coral disappear totally. Tom Heap, BBC News.
Now, Rob Bonnet is here with the highlights of sport today, coming up in 20 minutes.
Nisha, thanks. Our top stories are these. A last-minute appeal from Glasgow Rangers against UEFA's insistence that their UEFA Cup tie in Dagestan must go ahead. The Rangers say they're worried about the safety of their players. The Champions League football returns, with four-time winners Liverpool making their first appearance in Europe's premier competition for 16 years. And Daniel Vacek surprises Germany's fifth-seeded Nicolas Kiefer at the President's Cup in Tashkent. These and the rest of the day's sports stories coming up at 1/4 the next hour in Sport Today here on BBC World, if I can recover my voice.
Thanks, Rob. You need a glass of water. Britain's main opposition party, the Conservatives, will elect a new leader on Wednesday. That's 3 months after suffering their second crushing election defeat. The contest to find the leader has been extremely acrimonious. The two candidates are Ken Clarke, a well-known former minister, unashamedly pro-Europe, that puts him at odds with many Conservatives, and Ian Duncan Smith, little known around the country and very distrustful of European integration. The choice rests with Conservative Party members themselves, and to get a sense of their thinking, John Devitt has been to central England.
600-700.
John Davis and Barry Hill are leading Conservatives in a Conservative town. There was once a time when being in power seemed to come naturally to Conservatives, but after more than 4 years in opposition at a national level, they need a sense of direction and a new leader. Mr. Davis and Mr. Hill are even taking advice from the electorate.
So if you had the choice to vote, between Ian Duncan Smith and Kenneth Clarke, which one would you vote for?
Neither of them.
You would vote for Hill.
Even here in St Ives, there's no disguising the sense of disillusionment. The acrimonious, prolonged and very public leadership debate has made the party look deeply divided.
Good health, mate. Good health. All the best on elections.
I think really it should be down to, who we think, is going to get the Conservative Party back in power.
On the bowling green of the St Ives Bowls Club, the genteel competitiveness is much the way Conservatives once chose their leaders. Most people here are Conservative supporters, if not members of the party.
And who would vote for the other character, Mr. Duncan Smith? Oh,
Over tea and biscuits, a straw poll reveals a clear majority in favour of Ian Duncan Smith. Here they don't like Ken Clarke, mainly because they believe he'll hand more power to the European Union.
Kenneth Clarke's not a good ambassador, is he? I mean, he's a scruffy bloke, isn't he?
Well, yeah, but
he might have the knowledge, but he don't look anything, do he?
Just up the road, Ken Clarke is arriving to put his side of the story. A man who's held many of the most senior ministerial jobs in Britain, he says he's best placed to move the party back onto the centre ground of British politics. Coming to hear him, the people he needs to convince.
You're right there, dear.
Some of the 300,000 party members, average age about 65.
Conservatives can hardly complain about not being consulted about their new leader. Every paid-up member has a vote, and rarely has the rank and file been given so much attention.
Ian Duncan Smith, Eurosceptic and right-wing favourite, is at this private meeting too. He may not be very well known, but his views seem more closely in tune with today's Conservative Party. John Devitt, BBC News, St Ives.
And the result of that contest is due to be announced at around 16:15 GMT on Wednesday, and we bring you live coverage right here on BBC World. Now, holidaymakers in Europe are being warned that ice cubes served in drinks could cause serious illness. A survey of water and ice served in holiday locations throughout Europe found that 1 in 5 samples carried traces of human sewage bacteria.
Plenty of ice in your drink. It's often just what a holidaymaker needs. At this bar on the seafront outside Bournemouth, they're rigorous about hygiene. But out of around 180 samples of drinking water and ice from hotel rooms, campsites, bars, cafes and drinking fountains elsewhere in Britain and Europe, tests on ice found that 1 in 5 samples had harmful bacteria, some even traces of bugs from human faeces. At the French resort of Biarritz, more than half the ice samples were contaminated, and one was described as horrifying and repulsive. Half the samples in Spain were also contaminated. In the Algarve in Portugal, 2/3 of the ice samples were, and more than half of the ice taken in Blackpool were of dubious quality, with one potentially harmful.
The most likely reason for the ice being contaminated is that bar staff have handled it without washing their hands after going to the toilet. And the results, certainly for some of the ice samples that we took, we found fecal E. coli, which can result in sickness and diarrhoea.
If you're at all concerned about getting ill from ice drinks while on holiday, then the advice is to check that the bar is clean, that the people serving you are tidy and presentable. Or, of course, you can always order your drinks straight from the fridge, so they've been chilled and don't need ice. Nicola Carslaw, BBC News.
Quite a warning. Well, that's all from the newsroom for now. I'm Nisha Pillay. See you again in half an hour.
Hello there. Australia is our first port of call on this look at the world weather. Showers to come for Victoria and New South Wales with this little area of low pressure heading off towards New Zealand on Friday. Brighter behind this before the next front edges in to the west. A look at the cities shows some showers for Sydney and Auckland. The brightest spells remain to the north. You can see that on the satellite picture at the moment. Showers through much of Asia. This big trail of cloud is all the tail end of the Typhoon Danas. And another circulation here, this is the system Nari. Danas has given heavy rainfall in its path. It is also gusting up to 160 kilometres per hour still as it continues its journey north. But it should begin to clear out of the way of Japan completely by the end of Wednesday, and on Thursday we should return to a more typical mixture of sunshine and showers. But it looks like Nari isn't really going to move anywhere in a hurry. We are watching it and we will keep you updated. Crossing the water into Canada, lots of sunshine to be found here. Some showers for Winnipeg, but rain clearing Calgary by Wednesday. Although we have got quite a persistent band of rain along the eastern coast of the states that will start to edge away. We can also see the remnants of Hurricane Erin there on the satellite picture. Things much clearer behind that, though plenty of sunshine to come in the states for Tuesday and Wednesday. Showers as we head further south into Miami, around much of the Gulf of Mexico, through Central America into Colombia and Venezuela. But it's a bright time on its way for Rio and Buenos Aires, but the next band of rain pushes in to Santiago, a wet spell on its way there, and it remains wet and wintry further south too in the coming days. However, things are looking a lot brighter in Cape Town than we have seen recently. Certainly a more settled spell on its way for Wednesday and Thursday. Our equatorial showers continue across Africa, but sunshine to the north spills into many parts of the Mediterranean basin. But we are seeing some showers developing here too, lots of thundery outbreaks through many central areas of Europe. For more details on your area of the world though, why not take a look at our website, bbcworld.com.
Next on BBC World Business Report.